I'm just back from a long journey. I'm glad to be home, but I'm even more glad that I went. It's not the first time I have made the journey to Russia. Nearly 7 years ago, I was in Moscow. We were not at war then. The sky was not even overcast, but the clouds of war were beginning to gather on the distant horizon. You could just discern them. That was why I was in Moscow in 1935, talking with Mr. Stalin. I believed then, as I believe now, that there was no real conflict of interest between the Soviet Union and this country. We both said so in our communique at the time. I believed then, as I believe now, that despite the many obvious differences, our overriding purpose was the same. We both wished to maintain the peace. Well, we lost that peace, but we are determined not to lose this war or the peace that will follow it. And so I was glad of a chance to go again to Moscow, to speak again with Mr. Stalin. The Royal Navy carried us to our destination in North Russia with swift, quiet efficiency. They were wonderful hosts, but it was not an easy journey. We drove through heavy winter seas, and at one time, so they told us, we had tons of ice on board. I confess I was glad when we had rounded the North Cape and were sailing along the Murmansk coast. It was snowing hard in the dim half-light of the Arctic noon, where the sun never rises above the horizon in the winter months, when we landed on Soviet soil. A detachment of Russian soldiers were drawn up on the shore. They were a grand type of man, dressed in their warm sheepskin coats, a much more practical uniform, I can tell you, than the ersatz clothing and the sweepings of Goebbels' jumble sale, in which Hitler's armies have to retreat through the Russian snows. These Russian soldiers were flanked by officers carrying the Union Jack and the hammer and sickle. The yellow ochre of the uniforms, the bright splashes of color of the two flags against the snow-covered hills, the uncanny twilight at midday, the silence of falling snow, all these formed a most impressive setting for our first landing on Soviet soil. But it was friendly. Indeed, the courtesy and friendliness of this greeting was typical of our welcome at every stage of our journey. Flying conditions were very bad, so we traveled to Moscow by train. One stretch of our journey was over a section of the railway which Goebbels has often told you has been cut by enemy action. I can tell you from practical experience that Goebbels is wrong. The railway is intact, undamaged, and working smoothly and well.